The next afternoon, the heat over Visakhapatnam had softened, but the crowds along RK Beach Road were still thick. Families pressed against the barricades while schoolchildren waved small paper flags representing dozens of nations. Vendors pushed carts through the gathering spectators. Cold water, fresh coconut, chicken biryani. The smell of spices drifted through the salty air, blowing in from the Bay of Bengal. Along the beachfront, several BMP-2 Sarath amphibious vehicles sat waiting on the sand, their dark silhouettes facing the water. Their engines rumbled quietly as crews prepared for the demonstrations scheduled later in the evening. Lieutenant Arjun Rao checked his watch. 16 wows. Beside him stood Sub-Lieutenant Priya Nair, clipboard in hand, scanning the parade route where the first formations were assembling. "The Indonesian column is ready," she said, glancing down at her notes. "Japan and Australia are forming up behind them." Rao nodded, watching the long line of sailors stretching down RK Beach Road. The crowd along the barricades had grown thicker as the afternoon cooled. Schoolchildren waved flags, while vendors moved through the spectators, selling cold drinks and snacks. A petty officer approached and saluted. "Sir, the first formations are ready." Priya looked toward Rao. "Bands are standing by." Rao gave a small nod. "Start the bands." Moments later, the drums began echoing down the boulevard. The parade had started. Behind the barricades stood sailors from many visiting navies watching the procession. Among them was a small group of Americans wearing green flight suits instead of dress uniforms. Their shoulder patches read VP4, P8 Poseidon. One of the aircrew leaned against the railing. "Never seen this many navies in one place." Another scanned the endless marching columns, half the planet's fleets. They watched as formation after formation passed down the boulevard. Boots struck the pavement in perfect rhythm. Farther back in the parade formation, the Iranian sailors stepped forward. At the front, Petty Officer Amir Haddadi gripped the staff of the Iranian naval flag, the fabric moving slightly in the warm sea breeze. Just behind him marched Petty Officer Reza Farhadi, his posture rigid as their boots struck the pavement in steady cadence. Crunch, crunch, crunch. The small Iranian delegation moved in perfect rhythm as they entered the main stretch of RK Beach Road. Reza kept his eyes fixed straight ahead while the crowd watched quietly from behind the barricades. Near the front row, a group of Indian school children waved small paper flags representing each visiting nation. One girl held up a tiny Iranian flag and waved it enthusiastically. Reza noticed it from the corner of his eye, but kept his expression disciplined as the formation continued down the boulevard. Amir held the flag steady as the Iranian sailors passed the reviewing stand and continued along the parade route. Left, 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 right, left. The Iranian sailors passed the reviewing stand and continued down the boulevard. Among the spectators stood Petty Officer Nalin Pereira of the Sri Lankan Navy. He watched the Iranian formation carefully. "I think those are the sailors from the Dina," the Sri Lankan sailor beside him said. Pereira nodded. "I saw them last night near the harbor stalls." They watched the Iranian column disappear around the bend. For a moment, Pereira continued looking down the road. The strange thing about fleets like this was that tomorrow's enemies could be standing side by side today. The parade lasted nearly 2 hours, but it was only the beginning. Columns from Japan, Australia, Brazil, South Africa, France, and Italy marched past the cheering crowd, while naval bands marched beside them, drums and brass echoing along the beachside road. Finally, the Indian Navy Band struck the final marching cadence. Lieutenant Rao listened to the radio at his shoulder. Parade phase complete. He exhaled slowly. Now came the fun part. As the marching columns cleared the boulevard, attention shifted toward the coastline. The crowd turned toward the sea. A distant roar grew louder. 2 MiG-29K fighters suddenly appeared over the water, streaking along the shoreline in tight formation before climbing sharply into the sky. The crowd erupted. Moments later, a pair of naval helicopters followed, hovering briefly over the surf before banking inland. The air show had begun. Sailors along the barricades tilted their heads upward to watch the aircraft thunder overhead. Near the rail, one of the American P-8 aircrew nodded. Now that's a show. After the final aircraft passed overhead, attention shifted once again toward the beach. The BMP-2 Sarath amphibious vehicles that had been waiting along the shoreline rolled forward. Their engines growled as the armored vehicles rolled slowly across the sand in a demonstration of amphibious assault equipment. Tracks churned through the surf as the vehicles maneuvered along the waterline. The crowd watched with curiosity, phones rising to capture the moment. As evening settled over Visakhapatnam, sailors began drifting away from the parade route toward the waterfront promenade. Reza and Amir walked with two other Iranian sailors, their dark navy blue uniforms and matching caps standing out among the crowd. The rigid discipline of the parade had faded. A vendor lifted the lid from a large metal pot. "Chicken biryani, hot biryani," Amir smiled. "That smells better than ship food." Reza laughed quietly. Everything smells better than ship food. They joined the growing crowd of sailors from many nations gathering along the waterfront. Indians, French, Sri Lankans, Japanese, even a few Americans. For a few hours, the uniforms mattered less than the music and the food. Night finally settled over the harbor. Hundreds of drones rose into the sky, forming glowing shapes above the waterfront. Anchors, warships, submarine, and the symbol of the Milan exercise. The crowd cheered as the patterns shifted across the darkness. Moments later, the first fireworks exploded over the bay, scattering reflections across the water. Sailors from dozens of nations stood together, watching the display. Beyond the city lights, the fleets of the exercise rested quietly in the dark sea. Sailors from dozens of navies watched the fireworks together along the waterfront. For one evening in Visakhapatnam, the fleets of the world shared the same harbor.